The scoreboard's been reporting all week about some funny business in union-organized registration drives and also at electronic voting stations, some of which are apparently maintained by the Service Employees Union, SEIU. We take these reports very seriously. Voter fraud happens in just about every election, so we all must be on guard for any signs of anything irregular. Just today, for example, Daytona Beach City Commissioner Derrick Henry and his campaign manager Genesis Robinson, were arrested and charged with committing absentee ballot fraud during Henry's 2010 re-election campaign. But even if the worst suspicions about voter fraud are true, Scoreboard is optimistic that the huge wave of voter sentiment, such as the one we're riding now, cannot be denied or discounted. Attempts to fiddle with votes at the margin will likely be unsuccessful, and so we suspect will be President Obama's attempt to invigorate the union's heavy investment in his big government agenda. Here to score it all for us is Republican Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio. Here in New York, do some fundraising, right? Yeah. Everybody's got it. We've got a segment on that coming up in the next segment. But unions, look at what has happened in the past couple of years. They spent $10 million trying to keep Blanche Lincoln from winning the primaries. Yeah. They failed in that. Right. They're losing members. I think in the private sector, they've got 7% of the workforce. They're losing popularity, by the way. All the polls that we see show them down at 70 or almost at the lowest they've been in 70 years. So do they matter anymore?
Well, I mean, look, they're powerful. They weigh in on elections, and there's the potential of fraud, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. But big unions aren't as powerful as the American people, and I think the American people have decided. I think, as you point out, I think there is going to be a wave next week. I think between 50 and 60 seats in the House of Representatives, maybe more, because the people have had it. And you just, without going through the whole litany, I mean, think about the fact we adjourned Congress with a large tax increase hanging over the voters' head. We got a $1.3 trillion annual deficit. We got a $13 trillion national debt. The voters have had it, and so they're going to speak loud and clear next week. And I think the two big questions that will raise is, what will the Democrats do in the lame duck session after they get their
I want to talk about that, but I don't want to
what will Republicans do next year?
I don't want to leave the unions entirely, because you have a lot of unions in your district as well. Not all union members are happy about the fact that their dues are going to provide money for partisan politicians.
My dad, 30 years with General Motors. Union worker, worked on the line, hard work, one of that kind of last generation, came out of high school, went to work for GM, and he is as conservative a Republican as there could be. So you're exactly right. Rank and file people, they don't agree with the left-wing agenda they see from their union leadership, whether it's private sector unions or the ones you've highlighted, SEIU and the public sector.
Of course, now the UAW is essentially a public sector union.
Exactly.
I mean, GM has been taken over by the government, so if you work for UAW, you're working for the government.
And that's one more example of why the voters have had it and why they've already decided why we're going to have this wave next week. When the President of the United States fires the CEO of General Motors, when we the taxpayers own and run General Motors, the people say, wait a minute, something's not right in America, and they're doing exactly what Americans have done for 200+ years. When their country has gone off track, they're going to step forward, they're going to get involved, and they're going to put their country back on the right path so we can continue to be the greatest nation in history. Well, and you're going to see it next Tuesday.
Here's what really bothers me about public sector unions, and again, you could include not all UAW members, because of course Ford Motor Company never took a bailout. But public sector unions, their dues are essentially paid by taxpayers.
Exactly.
And that means that when their leaders take the union dues to endorse particular politicians, my tax dollars is being used in a partisan fashion that I might not agree with.
They're using your money to run a candidate against your values to get him elected so he can take more of your money. I mean, such a game. I mean, that's the game that gets played. But Americans see it now, and they're saying, wait a minute. Time out. We're not going to tolerate it anymore.
The president's a smart guy. Is he just wasting his time trying to get the union to come out and support him?
He's doing what politicians do in the last days of election, particularly when they're behind. They go to their base and they try to rally their base. They try to get as many votes as they can from their team to show up and maybe salvage it.
He sees it? Do you think the president and other Democrats see the fact that there is voter discontent with the way things have been done and the way he thinks they can still be done?
If he doesn't, he will next Tuesday. I'm convinced of that. Of course he has to see it. The president's a sharp guy. I think he's a hardcore leftist. He believes in big government, but he's a sharp guy. He sees what's brewing out there. He sees what's happening. He can read the polls just like the rest of us can. And next Tuesday, I think, as I said, is going to be a great day for Republicans.
By the way, you just came back from Ohio. What's the latest there? Is the discontent, has it peaked, the discontent, with the way things have been going the past couple of years, or is it growing?
Well, I think it may tighten up a little bit, as elections always do the last week, but I think we're going to pick up 4 seats. I think the Kilroy seat in Columbus, I think Steve Stivers wins that. Steve Chabot comes back in the Cincinnati seat, and I think there are 2 other seats in eastern Ohio that we pick up. So I think a net gain of 4 for Republicans, and I think John Casey's going to be our next governor, Rob Portman's going to be our next senator, and we're going to win the statewide across the ticket.
Stay with us, Congressman. We want to bring in our panel now. It's an all-star panel tonight. Fox News contributors Doug Schoen, Andrea Tantaros, and John Fund of the Wall Street Journal has written books about voter fraud, so he knows what he's talking about. John, first to you, because the very latest, we've been looking into this all week, and nothing has created more viewer mail than the subject of voter fraud and the possible participation of unions, particularly the SEIU, in that potential fraud. What can you tell us? What's the latest?
Well, in my book, Stealing Elections, I point out that we have a combination problem. We have voter fraud. We also have bureaucratic incompetence. And the problem with our election laws are that they're so loosey-goosey, so loosely defined often, that you can't always tell where the bureaucratic incompetence ends and the actual voter fraud begins. And what I think happened in Las Vegas, I know the Las Vegas registrar, I think what happened is they had computer glitches. And I don't think the Service Employees International Union have any access to the computer programming. They just handle the machines. They move them around. So there, I think we're talking about bureaucratic incompetence. If you really wanted to steal the election in Las Vegas, you would change the machines on election day, not during early voting when you would find the problem.
I understand what you're saying, and you make great points. However, the one person that we talked to who had problems with the machine suggested, after we had talked to him on air, that in fact one of the problems was the SEIU came in, and the SEIU guy came in and said, you should do this with the machine. So apparently they are playing a role, these SEIU guys, in how the machines work, how they're operating.
That's a separate issue if individual SEIU members are interfering with a voter. But I'm talking about anything systematic that's likely to swing hundreds of votes. I don't think that's happening. I do think what's happening in Las Vegas, though, which is problematic, are these reports that Harry Reid is holding free food rallies for voters and that union members are being given gift cards if they vote. If that's true, that's equivalent to a bribe, and I don't care what the Nevada Secretary of State says, that is highly questionable.
Well, and Doug, there are also questions about these voter registration drives, one of which was conducted by a group called Mi Familia Vota, which is at exactly the same address as the local chapter of the SEIU, even the same suite number, one of the same phone numbers as well. So, and they represented themselves as a nonpartisan group. Obviously, they are not, because SEIU takes very particular care to pick candidates.
Well, yeah, and we saw last year with Acorn that the abuses were apparently egregious, though it hasn't resulted in any wholesale national efforts to curb the abuses that we're now seeing. For those of us like you who value the democratic process, David, it is very disturbing when groups seek to systematically distort the process through either questionable activities at the polls, as John Fund suggested, or as groups like SEIU apparently are now doing, through wholesale registration drives of people that they locate who may or may not be eligible to participate in our elections.
David, if I could just add one quick
John.
thing. There is one problem in Nevada. Amy Busefink was the head of Acorn's voter registration office in Nevada in 2008. She ran the office that was rated on television that some of your viewers may remember. She was indicted on 39 counts of voter fraud and voter registration fraud. Her trial begins November 26th. Guess who Project Vote, which is Acorn's old voter registration arm, that's the group that Barack Obama started his political career with as a voter registration official in Illinois. Project Vote's new coordinator, forget out the vote efforts, is Amy Busefink, who is under indictment, 39 counts of voter fraud.
Wow.
I can't even imagine why the Justice Department isn't looking into this, or at least concerned, but the Justice Department has never been concerned about Acorn.
But our worst, despite our worst fears here, Andrea, and again, everybody has to be vigilant out there. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic. Everybody is vigilant out there. We all have technology that we didn't have just in the last election in 2008. So many people have iPhones. We're going to be talking later in the show about how new iPhone apps can help in preventing voter fraud. I mean, we have that. Plus, we have this huge wave of voter discontent, which even if groups like SEIU are effective along the margin through extrajudicial means in changing votes, they're not going to affect the opinion of that wave, are they?
No question. I mean, the wave is so big this cycle, I think it would be very hard to really influence them significantly. However, where races are very, very tight, you see particularly the Reed-Engel race, it should be of concern. And, David, I'd point out in a state like Nevada, where they're financially bankrupt already, that costs money to bring in election lawyers. Yeah. So this fraud is actually costing states that don't have the money even more. And
Congressman, there are so many races like the one that Andrea mentioned that are very, very razor close. Yep. This election could be tied up for months in court.
I mean, we've sort of gotten used to that in some ways. In fact, this could be the case in some of the races that Andrea points out. I also would mention, John Fund talked about the Justice Department. Now remember, this is the same Justice Department that dismissed the new Black Panther Party case, where it was obvious voter intimidation. Anyone who watched that clip, obvious voter intimidation. So that concerns me as well as we move forward with making sure we have free, fair, safe, good elections in this country. Are you,
by the way, we got to wrap. I got the wrap a minute ago, but are you satisfied that there are enough poll watchers around the country so that if there are shenanigans on election day, we'll be covered?
Yeah, well, I think we're much more prepared than we were in the past, and as we've said several times already, the wave, I think, is big enough where we're going to win in spite of what the shenanigans and games they may play.
Jim Jordan, a super effort in getting in scoreboard tonight. We know you battled the elements in getting here. Thanks very much.